Welcome to The Wash, your trusted resource for the latest and greatest in public health and hygiene. I'm your host, Abigail Wisney, and in today's episode, we're going to go over everything to deal with manual hand hygiene. We're going to cover what it is, what the different methods are, and why this may not be the best method for your facility. All right, let's get started. Paul, can you tell us what the different manual hand hygiene methods are?
Well, you have a manual sink. So you'll have just a standard faucet sink that you go up to and so forth. You can also have what is called a knee or foot pedal sink that you operate and turn the water controls on with either your knee or your foot pedal. Or you may have a multi-user sink. They may come in a flat line, they may come in a semicircle or a full circle. They may be photo eye operated where you step on a bar and then the whole trough or the whole fountain part of the sink turns on automatically. Those are really the three main categories of manual hand washing sinks that are available in the market.
So we're talking about all these different manual hand washing methods. How effective are they for pathogen removal?
It really boils down to that human behavior piece, that training of how long it takes to do it. I've described this in many ways, but the manual hand hygiene process, when doing it right, you have to lather the hands for about 20 seconds. It takes time, a few seconds at the beginning to wet the hands, get the water turned on, add the soap to the hands, rub them together correctly, then rinsing portion. That part of it takes that 40 to 60 seconds. One of the challenges when it comes to a manual washing method and pathogen removal is you get a lot of human variable. With that human variable, are people washing the same way every time? One of the larger challenges when it comes to pathogen removal and really understanding the efficacy is when you go to measure that. So when you police that behavior, you get X amount of response. Okay, so people are doing their due diligence and so forth and so on, but when you're not policing that behavior, you really get a varied outcome. And so that's one of the difficult things with it. The other thing that's really key about manual hand hygiene, and really when it comes down to the pathogen removal, and this steps into a little bit of the compliance, it's really about you onboard that person. And when you onboard that person, you teach them how to do hand hygiene, and they do it and so forth. And then, as time goes by, they kind of don't do it the same way, maybe be doing it quicker, so forth. So you have to go back and retrain a little bit, and that takes time. That takes effort, energy, money, so forth to do it. And you have to go back and re-onboard that person a little bit again to get the hygiene standards you require. Those are factors that always will have to be considered. So you get a peak of people right after training, washing hands correctly, doing it the right way, so forth, it starts to slide down. So you go back and you start that retraining process again, and you get that peak. And so you really get this large swings in compliance, which really affects your pathogen removal.
So with human behavior, it's really difficult for it to remain consistent and meet those different compliance requirements, right?
Exactly what I was just kind of mentioning a little bit ago. It's about that compliance of making sure I'm doing the same every time, especially when they're not looking. When you're not looking, to make sure that everybody is washing correctly and meeting those standards that you require, using soap, using the right amount of water, doing it for the right length of time, getting all those touch points correctly every time they wash their hands. That really has to do with the compliance piece. The documentation piece is really, really hard to document manual hand hygiene, again, unless you're policing the behavior and watching how are my people doing. Well, as soon as they realize this, just like they do, it's called a secret shopper, but for hygiene in a hospitals they do this a lot. They sit there and watch people and so forth, and they're documenting it and so forth. You really, once they figure that out, whenever they see you, that's what they're going to be doing. Again, it's about policing that behavior. So documentation on a manual system is incredibly difficult. It's not easily measured.
So really, even if you put it perfectly in documentation, it's really rare that they're actually going to follow it every single time.
Correct. Again, it's that human behavior piece. Am I having a bad day? Am I having a great day? Is my buddy sitting right next to me when I'm washing my hands? Am I chit-chatting with him and I'm not really washing my hands well because I'm chit-chatting? Yeah. There's a lot of human variables in there that we have to take into account. And keeping in mind that, one of the largest risk factors coming into a food manufacturing plant are the people. And are we following the hygiene standards that corporations established to make sure that we're doing a quality job every time?
And really, it's not just about pathogen removal. If you're not paying attention to exactly how you're washing your hands, it could use a lot of water and soap, right?
So you're absolutely correct. You look at a manual faucet. When you first turn it on and the water starts flowing and so forth, and you wet the hands, that water continues to flow, you lather your hands. Keep in mind that water's still flowing, and that water that is going down the drain is really never come in contact with your hands. But that's a manual method. When you have a manual faucet, you have to turn that on and do it. You don't want to touch it again because you'll have a cross-contamination event. With soap consumption, it's really a human variable piece. It's really hard to deal with. Did I use 1 squirt, 2 squirts, 5 squirts? Do I have massive hands that I just sit and pump that 10 times? Mm-hmm. Or here's the other challenge with those methods is when it's empty, does somebody say something about it? For years, I've said you can have the best soap in the world, but it doesn't do you any good if it's still in the container. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to make sure that you have it there. Or you have people dedicated to making sure those supplies are ready to go so you have an adequate way to wash your hands every time, especially when you have your peak people going through. Because when they run out, there's only one thing that usually happens, and that's circumvention. They go around the process. That is actually a pitfall of a manual hand washing sink with a faucet. You do have those touch points. So when you first come up to the sink, you obviously have to turn on the water. You have to get it to the right temperature. You have to wet the hand. You have to then add soap. You have to then lather and so forth, and you have to rinse. Really then the proper methodology is then you need to reach for a paper product to then be able to shut off that faucet. Okay, that way you have a barrier, obviously the paper towel between your skin and hand. Now, if you're a facility that's running an air dryer, it's very hard to shut that faucet back off without touching that. And that's a cross-contamination event for the simple fact I just touched it with an unclean hand to turn it on. I just then redeposited any pathogens could have been left on that faucet back to my skin.
All right, so just a random question that I have, Paul. Does the water temperature actually affect the pathogen removal and skin health?
Actually, water temperature does affect skin health. I mean, if you have overly hot water, you're actually wicking more oils and so forth from the hand. That's going to dry the hand out. Again, when you come into contact with pathogens and you have really dry skin, you're going to absorb those pathogens more. When you have well-hydrated skin, you don't. You do want warm water for a comfortable compliance hand wash. One of the challenges, everybody says, I need hot water to be able to kill the pathogens. That's actually a little bit of a misnomer. A lot of the pathogens that we deal with actually have a greater temperature range than our human temperature range. Our human temperature range when it comes to a simple hand wash is really anywhere on the very low end, about 45 degrees, which is really cold water, to really about 105, and that's really on the high end. Some of these pathogens can live well beyond both ends of that spectrum on temperature. Mm-hmm. So you really want it for compliance. If you're dealing with heavy, maybe oils and things like that, warmer water helps because it helps break those fats and oils down, easier to remove from the skin. But again, you're going to get continued dryness.
So Paul, is there ever a time when you would actually recommend a manual sink for a facility?
When I would choose a manual sink is when I may be dealing with heavier soils and debris. I may need to have a little bit of that removal to be able to then wash my hands. But again, if I'm washing in that manual sink, I'm back to that behavior piece. But there's better ways of dealing with heavy soils and debris. And I have this conversation a lot with a lot of food processing plants when they're dealing with that. It's best in those situations to actually wear, again, a disposable glove. That way those soils and debris and so forth are remaining on that glove and they can be disposed of in a waste container. Now, in those situations where you're not able to wear a glove, they would prefer you to have a bare hand. You can do it a different way. And how I highly recommend is that, yes, I'm dealing with heavy soils and debris. I still want to go through a similar process where I actually want to use a paper towel. I want to remove the bulk of that heavy soiling and debris, and I want to put it in a trash can again. The reason for that is that, first of all, I don't want that in my sink for the simple fact that all that heavy soil and debris could be a potential food source for pathogens. When you turn on manual sinks or automated washers, you're splashing a little bit of water, you could be splashing pathogens back up. We don't want to do that. We want to protect the hand as best we can. So we want to look at this thing as, how can I avoid risk? So my methodology is use a paper towel, remove those soils, debris, and then I would prefer to go to an automated hand washer at that time.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about manual hand hygiene. As you guys know, we do try to be a resource for you guys at your facility. So we will have different manual hand hygiene resources, including hand washing posters and things down below that you can go over and download. We will also go over and provide a link to our employee hygiene toolbox. There we actually have a whole module all about hand washing and how to create a hand washing culture at your facility. So check that out, and we will see you on the next episode.